to Robert Peterson. Ready to rumble.
Woo, Robert! Yeah!
I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. In 1984, the Secretary of Human Services, Department of Human Services, Margaret Heckler, said, "We will have a vaccine for testing within 2 years." That was 1984. 29 years later, and there's still no vaccine, there's still no cure, and people are still dying, people are still getting infected 29 years later. But if you're here today and you're positive, not only should you be grateful for the advances in the treatment, because you're here today, but you should be grateful for what everybody did before you. In 1986, we went to the voting booths and we voted on your freedom. There was a proposition on the ballot in California that if you tested positive for HIV, or if they thought you had been exposed to the virus, they wanted to quarantine you. That was 1986, that was Proposition 64. Then in 1988, we had Proposition 69, virtually the same thing. And we voted on your very freedom. That's why you should be grateful for so many people, just not only nationally, Cleve Jones that has worked so hard to get us where we are today, but locally. There's Ken Sewell, who, if you had a landlord problem, if they didn't want to rent to you or they were going to evict you because of your status, Ken Sewell was the go-to man. And I still hear, and I just heard this the other day, oh, if Russ Amundsen was here today, he'd be pissed off if he heard that, something. Audrey sent me on a mission to find Ken Sewell's obituary, and I got sidetracked and I didn't find his obituary, but I found an article in the Californian, and it was written in 1984, and the headline said, first Bakersfield victim dies of AIDS. And I went and I looked at the article, and I never dreamed that I would find his name, and his name was listed. The Californian identified him as Jeff Boone. And so I went back and I looked for his obituary, and I found his obituary, and there's very little information on his obituary. It was just basically didn't even have his birth date, didn't even have his death date. Had his mother's and father listed as Mr. and Mrs. Johnny Boone. And I did some research. I called every old queen I could find. And I said, "Do you know who this Jeff Boone is?" And nobody knew. And then somebody suggested Bill Phelps. Not that he's an old queen, but he's been around for a while. And Bill, I wish Bill was here tonight. Bill's former partner, Cal Denny, passed away from AIDS. And I called Bill, and he said, "Yeah, I remember Jeff." And so he told me a little bit about Jeff, and I said, "All I want is a picture." And he said, "Oh, I have lots of pictures." He goes, "Cal, when Jeff died, his mom gave Bill and Cal some undeveloped film." And so I got Jeff's picture. I don't know if you can see it very well, but this is Jeff. He died at 22, and he was Bakersfield's. There's some question of whether he was the first one. Bill thought he remembered a couple more before him, but the Californian identified him as the first one. There's a saying that what doesn't kills us makes us stronger. And AIDS has killed so many people in the LGBT community. But those of us that are here are so much stronger for living through the horrible decade of the 80s and 90s when it was a marathon of funerals. So with that, thank you for being here, and thank you for showing your support.
I almost forgot. There's also another individual here that should be sharing her message. And I want to remind people too, PFLAG and LBGTQ are two really wonderful organizations. And here in Kern County, it is a hard place to be who you are. And we are thankful for the many years of advocacy, of support groups, of resources that have been available to our community, not just as people living with AIDS, but also as people who are gay or lesbian, who need guidance and support and a way to feel dignity, the human worth of who we all are. And so I want to ask you to please raise your candles to welcome Whitney Waddell, always there for LBGTQ.
Bakersfield LGBTQ is delighted to be here. I wish there was, no reason for us to have to gather. And I really appreciate this year's motto, getting to zero. We have to get to zero. We can't accept 1 or 5 or 20 or 50,000 or hundreds of thousands. We have to get to zero. And if we're going to get to zero, it's going to take dedicated people all over the world who not only give up some of their time or give up some of their energy, but who sacrifice day in and day out, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And if there's anybody in this community who exemplifies that, it's Audrey. She has spent this whole evening thanking everybody else who contributes. But who is it who gets up in the middle of the night when the phone rings? Who is it who rushes over to Ricky's to make sure that a new client is comfortable? Who puts out the word when there's a need for patients with AIDS? Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, let us just take one moment to recognize the incredible person among us, Miss Audrey Chavez. That's all.
Somebody had thanked me the other day in the community, and I do need to thank my husband, Martin Chavez. He's here somewhere.